Good morning and good afternoon if you are joining us from Europe or from Israel. I am Magda Tedder, the Schwidler Chair in Judaic Studies at Fordham University, and I'm honored to welcome you to our fourth webinar in the series Scholars at War, organized in partnership with the History Department of the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, the American Academy of Jewish Research, which in the 1930s and 1940s devoted considerable resources to rescuing and supporting scholars affected by the Nazi regime, the Lviv Center and the Lviv Center for Urban History. I am grateful to Irina Klimenko from the Ludwig Maximilian University for all her work and coordination with the Ukrainian scholars affected by the current war and for coordinating this series. In the past three webinars, we heard about Jewish studies in Ukraine, the adjustments of scholars and their institutions made since the Russian invasion, from dispersing and turning to remote learning to turning their centers into refugee shelters. We also learned about ideas about rebuilding, what rebuilding would entail, and how important reimagining urban spaces would be. And last week, cultural critic Daria Badior and historians Sofia Diak and Irina Klimenko reflected on cultural hegemonies and hierarchies and on cultural and epistemic visibilities and invisibilities of Ukraine, or even of Eastern Europe from their specific professional vantage points. And while millions of Ukrainians are now in need of basic necessities, scholars continue to reflect on how their pre-war research illuminates the current war experience. And we wanted to give them a forum to share these ideas with us. So I want to hand it over now to Dr. Irina Klimenko, a key partner in the organizing of his series, a historian of early modern history at the Ludwig Maximilian University, and she will introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, Magda. Good morning and good afternoon. I'm honored and grateful to Tetyana Batanova for being with us today. Tetyana Batanova is a research fellow and acting head of the Judaica department of the Institute of Manuscript of Vernadsky National Library of Ukraine. She's also a member and secretary of the Ukrainian Association for Jewish Studies. Tetyana taught Yiddish and the master program in Jewish Studies and the certificate program in Jewish Studies at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy in Kyiv. And she was a guest lecturer at the International Yiddish Center in Vilnius. Tetyana Batanova has translated into Ukrainian several works of Yiddish literature. Her research interests include archival and library Jewish heritage, Yiddish language, literature and culture, Ukrainian Jewish relations, and the history of Jewish political parties in the time of 1917s and 1918s. Tetyana, thank you so much for joining us in these difficult, terrible times. The floor is yours.
Shalom Aleichem, dear friend. Let peace be upon you, dear friends. I'm sincerely grateful for your support of us here in Ukraine, and I would cordially like to thank Dr. Irina Klimenko for her permanent assistance and care about me and all other researchers staying in Ukraine for this personal connection and support. And also I'm grateful to Fordham Center for Jewish Studies and their partners, the American Academy for Jewish Research, the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich and its history department, as well as wonderful, gorgeous Lviv Center for Urban History for making this Scholar at War lecture series. It is also a big honor for me to speak here. Although, as many can feel now, it is stressful to speak. Can we speak in the time of war and despair? Can we sing? Can we joke? Can we read aloud poetry, fiction, watch films? That is the question. I wanted to start my lecture with a video with a song written for famous Yiddish poem by one of the most prominent Yiddish poets of the 20th century and probably ever, of Avrom Sutzkever. Unfortunately, technically, I could not post it and demonstrate, but we will send you the link at YouTube and you can hear the song which was created by my first teacher of Yiddish, Zhenya Lopatnik. She is a musician, composer, wonderful educator. Avrom Sutzkever, who was born in 1913 in Belarus, which was at that time Lithuania, being a small kid, has seen the First World War. Then he saw Siberia because his family moved there for several years during the First World War. Later on, he came back to Vilna. And during the Second World War, he saw all the tragedies and awful events of the Second World War, Holocaust, ghetto, and he managed to escape the ghetto and join the Jewish partisans. And his diary, I'm trying to read now, not in Yiddish. He wrote his diary of Vilna ghetto in Yiddish, and 2 years ago it was translated into Ukrainian by Alexandra Uralova, so I read the book in Ukrainian and get some peace for myself now and some hints how you can live during the wartime. I will read a poem which was written in 1974, some 30 years after the Holocaust and World War II events, which are very cozy for me now. Just a moment. I will read first in Yiddish and then the English translation. Wer wird bleiben? Was wird bleiben? Bleiben wird a Wind. Bleiben wird die Blindheit von dem Blinden, was verschwindt. Bleiben wird a Simen von dem Jam, a Schnirrel Schäum. Bleiben wird a Wolkendel verzeppet auf a Bäum. Wer wird bleiben? Was wird bleiben? Bleiben wird a Traf. Breches dick a Reus zu großen, wieder sein Baschaf. Bleiben wird a Fiedelreus, lekovet sich allein. 7 Großen von die Großen, wollen sie verstehen. Mehr von alle Sternen als von Zoffen bis aher, bleiben wird der Stern, was fällt in Sameträr. Ständig wird a Tropfen Wein euch bleiben in sein Krug. Wer wird bleiben? Gott wird bleiben. Ist dir nicht genug? The English translation was made, and I found it on internet, by Michael Steinlauf, professor of Jewish and Yiddish studies. It was made in 2009. Who will last and what will last? A breeze, a blind man's blindness when he's past. Sea sign, strand of foam, a cloud caught up on its way home. Who will last and what will last? A single sound, creation grasped, greening and unbound. A fiddle rose stands tall. 7 grasses of the grasses will understand it all. More than all the stars, not strewn down to here, a star will last that falls into nothing but a tear. In its jug, a drop of wine stands true. Who will last? God will last. Not enough for you. I would like to dedicate my current lecture talk to Kharkiv, the city which is now being shelled and bombed by the Russian troops. The city which is a hometown of a famous Yiddish educator, poet and singer, Zhenya Lopatnik, my first Yiddish teacher, who was coming to Kharkiv, from Kharkiv to Kiev every week to teach Yiddish in 2004, 2006. Fortunately, Zhenya is alive, healthy, and she lives several years already in New York with her husband and 2 gorgeous kids. Her other members of family are in Kiev, other places. Kharkiv is now and was a city of big university culture, of music. There is a beautiful Yiddish Jewish community center, Beit Dan, and they held Kharkov klezmer tags, Kharkov klezmer festival every year, which gathered Kharkiv musicians and musicians from all over the world to foster and popularize Yiddish Jewish culture of Central Eastern Europe. Kharkiv city was also called Edenia in a utopian novel of Ben Yaakov, or Kalman Zingman, his real name. That is the writer whom we know quite a little. He lived a short life. He died in 1920s, not in Ukraine, not in Kharkiv, but being shortly during revolutionary times in 1918 Kharkiv, he saw this rapid revolutionary democratic changes, which somehow appealed to many Yiddish tourists, Jewish cultural figures, political figures from former Russian Empire. And they came to Kiev, Kharkiv, they established publishing houses, cultural organizations, and in 1918 revolutionary Kharkiv, Kalman Zingman, himself a Litvak, Litvak, that means that he was not originally coming from Ukraine or Poland, but from Belarus, Lithuania. He was shortly in Kharkiv, saw these changes and wrote utopian novel, how the life would be here in 25 years. Of course, if we count now 1918 plus 25, that is 1943. And his utopia didn't come into life, but he saw the life of free peoples, Ukrainian people, Jewish people, Yiddish street names, Yiddish culture being flourishing in Ukraine. He even predicted that there will be a big, beautiful monument of Taras Shevchenko in Kharkiv. He predicted some technical novelties which were not there, some automatic machines, some kinds of delivery electric machines which can now only be produced or imagined. And you can read this novel Edenia in der Zukunft dort Edenia. In Ukrainian, it was published, translated by me and my colleague Natalia Rindyuk, let her memory be a blessing, in 2014, and published in a journal of Ukrainian Association for Jewish Studies, Judaica Ukrainica in 2014. In English, it has now, I think, several translations. One was published in 2017 volume of Judaica Ukrainica. Another one you can find at online Yiddish studies journal in Geweb. You can even read it in English and Yiddish simultaneously. I thank to Irina for introducing me, and I would also recall some memories before I start my presentation, how I came to Yiddish studies. I was studying in Kiev-Mohyla Academy doing my bachelor degree in history, and in 2004, in addition to my BA to history, I decided to take minor in Jewish studies at the recently opened interdisciplinary certified program in Jewish studies. I joined the program several weeks later after it started because I was overwhelmed with studying. I was not sure I should join. And I was not confident in myself if I have skills, language, talent to climb through a completely new alphabet, Hebrew alphabet, Yiddish oisies, Jewish letters, owing to my Hebrew teacher. The Hebrew language was first for me to study, Serhiy Hurbich. I stayed at the program and made some small student success in my studying. Then in a year, I have also chosen an optional course, Yiddish language course, beginner Yiddish language course. And it completely changed my life and my attitude to this studying. I have felt in love with Yiddish language, Yiddish songs and culture. And it was owing to Zhenya Lopatnik, who was coming from Kharkiv to Kyiv every week by train to give 2 lessons of Yiddish, one for beginner group, another one for intermediate group, and then come back to her family in Kharkiv. I was just 1 lesson at the beginner level group, and then Zhenya proposed and even insisted that I join another intermediate Yiddish group, since I have already had some beginner Hebrew level and studied for many years, not successfully, but studied German at high school and university previously. Some people still think that Yiddish is a dead language. That's a sorrow for me. And it's not that flourishing as it was before 1939, of course, but it's alive. And some other people say that Yiddish is just a dialect, some Germanic dialect. It's also, for me, a foolish stereotype, because, and if I want to place it very shortly, I say no, it's a separate language. Yes, of course, it is close to German, in some more things, it's close sometimes to English because it's the same linguistic group. It also has influence from Slavic languages, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Polish, and also a big component of ancient Jewish language, Hebrew, which is connected to the cycle of religious life. And it's amazing how these various components have produced a big history and culture of Yiddish. So Zhenya insisted that I study Yiddish at intermediate group, and I started with her from October 2005 till June 2006. Zhenya also recommended me to apply and gave me a perfect reference letter for 2006 YIVO, Yiddish Summer Program in New York, which was at that time at New York University. And this trip, this academic study trip, opened me a big, great, and magnificent Yiddish land. Yiddish land that is, in translation, a Jewish land, land of Yiddish people, which is now all over the world, with the solidarity, sympathy, democracy, and of course, thousands of amazing Yiddish tours. I mean, doers, public and cultural figures, professors, researchers, musicians, klezmer, students, und Stammliebhabers von Yiddish. And simply put it, amateurs, Yiddish lovers, lovers of Yiddish culture. From before the war, before it started, and there were rumors or alerts that it can be started, which we could not believe till the very first day of this new escalation, new aggression. I have got plenty of letters, messages, phone calls from all over the world, from my Yiddish professors, which are now living in various countries, Argentina, Israel, Poland, Lithuania, Canada, France, and many other countries. In 2006, when I came to New York, I have not only studied with best professors, and it were my first Yiddish summer courses with Sheva Zucker, with Bruch Kaplan, Mark Kaplan. Elliot Palevsky was my teacher later on, but I also bought a beautiful book, which you can find in English, and who have not read it yet, I recommend it. It's Professor Henry Abramson's books, A Prayer for the Government, which was published at the end of 90s, 1999 in English, and translated and published in Ukrainian only in 2017, some almost 20 years later. I was editing a bit the translation. I'm not the translator of the book, but the book tells the story of Ukrainian Jewish relations in the time of revolutionary times, 1917, 1920. And now I will start my presentation to show some hints from what amazes me with this topic. I will start from the topic of this smaller presentation will show you that some hints of Yiddish life in Ukraine in 1917, 1919, and how Yiddish which was sometimes called jargon, pejoratively, by Imperial Russian officials, or even by Jewish political and cultural figures, Zionists. Sometimes Yiddish as a language of diaspora, language of poor people, probably not that enlightened people, but popular masses, was called jargon. However, if to read history of Yiddish, already in Middle Ages, there were attempts to write some fictional literature in Yiddish. Jewish culture of Hasidism, religious movement, was also using Yiddish to speak to common people, common Jewish people, and how this common language of common people became official language and language of high culture. Already at the end of 19th century, there were attempts to address in literature and write in literature in Yiddish. These attempts were made by Jewish enlighteners, maskilim, such as Mendele Moicher Sforim, the grandfather of Yiddish literature. Then later on, Sholem Aleichem. However, they themselves, being enlightened people, they knew Russian, they knew Hebrew, they even wrote in Hebrew. They wanted to speak to all Jewish people of Europe. That is why they used Yiddish, and they wanted Jewish people to, common Jewish people, to feel that they are worth of living. They have culture, they have language, and they can address all kinds of questions in their own language. High questions, political questions, lyrical questions. And in 1917, it became that Yiddish, for a short period of time, was one of 4 official languages of Ukrainian People's Republic, or Ukrainian National Republic. Before 1917, there were already Jewish political parties which were thinking that Yiddish as language of Jewish masses and common people should be the language of schooling, language of cultural national autonomy and national rights of Jewish people in the lands where Jews were comprising minority in different states. I will put you a song, a revolutionary song, which is kind of Jewish socialist Bundist song pre-1917, and just for you to hear it, just a moment.
In alle Klassen, wo man geht, hört man Sabbastoffges. Jinglach, Meidach, Kind und Cage, Schmusen, Pumpe, Bockes. Jinglach, Meidach, Kind und Cage, Schmusen, Pumpe, Bockes. Genug schon wieder Horven, genug schon Borgenleien. Macht das Sabbastoffge, lo mir Brüder sich befreien. Macht das Sabbastoffge, lo mir Brüder sich befreien. Brüder und Schwester, lo mit dem Köpfen die Hand. Lo mir Nikolai, Kalender, brechen die Hand. Brüder und Schwester, lo mir gehen zusammen. Lo mir Nikolai kellen begraben mit der Manne. Hey, hey, da neu Polizei, da neu sammelt der Schavien. Brasse. hat weggelemist. Eins ist geworden, ein Kapitalist. Hey, hey, der neue Polizei, der neue Tage, das
I hope you have had the sound. Magda, Irina?
Yes, it was perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay, that is the Bundist song, probably of 1905 or before that. Bund as Jewish workers, as General Jewish Workers League that is Bund of Yiddish, was part of International Socialist movement. However, they had in their political agenda also questions connected to Jewish national rights in the lands of diaspora. And that song is cozy and interesting for me because it shows not only this revolutionary spirit. For many people, socialism now is something quite far, not understandable. At the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, it was probably the most up-to-date ideology which tried to unite people, to hear the voices of those groups which were marginalized by powers, authorities. And that is the Bundist song. You see a caricature placard on Bund as a young, small child with a gun making revolution. You see red scarf and even Magen David on his heart, but you know, this is caricature. This is also humoristic and someone making jokes of Bund. The song Doloi Polizei is a famous one, and for me it is emotional because in December 2013, when we already have had big protests at Maidan in Kyiv, and the students were beaten by authorities, we were standing for our European future here in Kyiv. There was a stage, and this stage was standing there 24 hours a day. People can come there, say something. Some artists were coming all the time, playing music. Different religious leaders from all kinds of religions would come and say their prayers for peaceful Ukrainian future. And I met my former student and my dear friend, Mitya Gerasimov, who is originally from Kazan, but in 2000 something, he came to Odessa and then to Kyiv and stayed in Ukraine because he wanted to study and then to write and perform klezmer music. And I met Mitya, who was having a band called Pushkin Klezmer Band, Pushkin, as Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. It's also a joke. And Mitya told me, we will be singing at Maidan. What do you think of it? What should we sing at the stage? And I told him, Mitya, for a week or two, I'm going with this song in my head. Hey, hey, Doloi Polizei. Hey, hey, go away, police, militia. Go away, this tyranny in Russia, but it's not only in Russia, it's Soviet Union, former Russian Empire, you know. So he said, oh, great, could we sing it at Maidan together with you? And I even made some Ukrainian translation of it with some reinterpretation of verses because we had not Tsar Nikolai, but stupid President Yanukovych. That's my emotional comeback. I'm sorry. We will move on to revolutionary times. How it happened that enlightened Jews also started call Yiddish not jargon, but language, or at least Yiddish, not jargon. Yiddish means Jewish from translation. In 1907, there was a famous Chernovitz language conference dedicated to the questions, political and cultural questions of Jewish language. And many writers, artists, political figures, civil figures came to Chernivtsi, Chernowitz of Yiddish or in German, to discuss the problems of Jewish language or languages, because there were, except in addition to Hebrew, Yiddish, there were other languages, local languages of Jews, but Yiddish was the most speakable, the most used common language. And they were already writing in Yiddish, and they made a declaration after this conference that Yiddish is one of the languages of Jewish people. This is a language of Jewish people was also a problem of discussion, but it was already a big step forward, because Yiddish was not called jargon by Zionists or other Jewish enlighters. In 1917, after February 1917 revolution in Petrograd, Kiev life and Ukrainian life was also very quickly democratized, and Ukrainian Central Rada, or Rada is council, a kind of parliament. I say a kind of because there were no elections, but various Ukrainian and all Russian organizations could bring their representatives to this People's Assembly, Ukrainian Assembly in Kiev. This is the building where Ukrainian Central Rada was working. And in June 1917, Ukrainian representatives of different civil and political organizations, in order to have legal representation of all Ukraine, not only Ukrainians, they invited representatives of democracies, so to called, of national minorities, to join their work. And 5 Jewish parties, 5 Jewish political parties, which were already established at the time, except for other parties, they joined the work of Ukrainian Central Rada, and there are still remaining plenty of documents, press, periodicals, placards from the time. For instance, you can see the placard of Bund, General Jewish Workers League. The placard says, "Dorten, wo wir leben, dort ist unser Land." There where we live, there is our land. Bund, as I told previously, was already including Yiddish and Yiddish cultural and political questions in their political agenda. They were having the concept of doigkeit. Do of Yiddish in Yiddish is here, as in German is da. So Zionists would say that Jews should struggle for better life in their own land, Zion. but in 1917, there was no Jewish state. It was a dream, a big dream to come true someday. And other parties, among them Bund, would say that, okay, the dream is good, but we should also struggle for Jewish national rights, school, universities, libraries, theater, in the places where we live. I see the chat. Okay. You will tell me when, if we need to wrap. I will put this presentation for you. You can include it in the transcript of the video so people can see other artifacts.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 5 more minutes, I think it would be good.
Okay, I'm sorry. Just. Another party was Jewish People's Party, Volkspartei. You see this avant-garde placard, election placard made by Jewish artist Solomon Yudovin. Another party was Vereinigte, United Socialist Jewish Workers' Party, and it was very strong in Ukraine. There were also Workers of Zion Party, Coalition, which were socialists and Zionists at the same time, and general Zionists, Allgemeine Zionisten. You can also see the poster of the time. It was the time when, for the first time in history, there was the post of Minister in Jewish Affairs, which was responsible not for negotiations with authorities into Jewish questions, but which was responsible for Jewish schooling questions, cultural questions, imposing Yiddish into official life, because legislation and some other things were published in Yiddish. And you can also see an example of money of Ukrainian People's Republic, which were in 4 languages. One side was in Ukrainian, another side was in 3 other languages, in Russian, 100 karbovancev, in Polish, and in Yiddish, 100 karbovances. And some examples of Jewish periodicals which are preserved now. These are rare Yiddish sources, historical sources, which can bring us understanding of the time and how they lived, and it is impossible to imagine. So the biggest newspaper was Neue Zeit by Party Vereinigte. They actually published not only news from Ukraine, advertisement, but also news from all over the world. Of course, they were more socialist in their views, but they gave also understanding of all other events around them. Some other newspapers like folkist newspapers, Zeitfragen or Time Questions. And in the newspapers, when you see some Zionist newspapers, for instance, which were published in Kyiv, you can see in the middle of newspapers various news and also letters from Crimea. And Crimea was supposed Ukraine already, or part of this life which is important in Kyiv for Jewish communities. During this First World War, although we all know about hardships of revolution and then this awful time of pogroms, but in 1917, beginning of 1918, I guess the life in Kyiv was not that hard as in some other parts of former Russian Empire, because here we see some short notes and greetings to Poland and Lithuania, and below you also see how Jews and how much they cared about Jewish communities in Lithuania and Poland, and they even gathered money to support communities in Poland and Lithuania, Lietuvos Dieden in Polen und Lite. You can also see wonderful examples of revolutionary satire, mainly done by famous Yiddish writer, caricaturist, feuilletonist, and journalist Der Tunkeler, Josef Tunkel. And here you see Der Iddischer Kulturwagon, the Jewish culture wagon, and you see Tarbut, Jewish cultural organization which stands for Hebrew language, and Kulturlige, which was non-political Yiddishist cultural organization uniting artists, educators, civil and political figures. And I recommend you to Google and find wonderful examples of artistic Yiddish avant-garde of Kulturlige, which was established in January 1918 in Kyiv, and then it was having its departments or filials in Ukraine, Poland, Moscow, and even in some further different states. Some examples of their publishing: Schul und Leben periodical, famous artists taking part in the movement were L. Lisitsky, Joseph Chaikov previously. It is interesting that Kulturlige publishing house was publishing not only Yiddish literature or some essays about education, new Jewish Yiddish schools, but also they were translating famous European literature and Ukrainian or Russian literature into Yiddish to make Yiddish the language of all the spheres. And also, as I asked if we can joke during the very hard times, here you can see the example of periodical Der Aschendai. Aschendai is demon, which was sporadically published because of revolution. It could not be published weekly, monthly. It was published when it happened to be published, and it was also edited and illustrated and even contributed by Der Tunkeler. And he laughed at revolution, at Jewish political battles between themselves. Here you see Moshe Rafes and Nochum Sirkin struggling between themselves, so Bundist and Zionists. Here you see former ministers in Jewish affairs, gewesene Moshe Silberfarb and Wolf Flatsky. And also in late 1918, beginning of 1919, the Jewish national autonomy and all dreams to have peaceful inter-ethnic relations and this life were broken. And you can see this caricature with Yiddisher base oilem with Jewish cemetery, where you have cavers, matzevot, tombstones of Jewish autonomy, freedom of press, National Jewish Council, Yiddish Jewish ministry or ministry in Jewish affairs, democratic communities. It's my last slide, and it shows you and reminds you of Utopia, of Kalman Zingman's Utopia Edenia. Several years ago, there was a modern reinterpretation exhibition in Kharkiv, in Lviv Center. I was invited there. I couldn't come, but I know that it was done by contemporary artists and some great-grandchildren of Kalman Zingman could come and participate and think how to make this new exhibition. We will have to think about new life in Kharkiv, new life in Kyiv after the war ends, and what to do next. I will be happy to have some discussion if we have at least some time for it. I'm sorry for being long and not very concentrated.
Thank you, Tetyana. It was very, very interesting and very rich, and I certainly have learned a lot from it, and I thought I knew something about the modern Yiddish culture in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine. So thank you so much. We don't have much time left. We have a few minutes left, but since you we both had some questions, but since you ended with the Edenia slide and thinking about the future, I wonder whether you have some early, in time thoughts on, given your work on this literature in crisis, in the moment, being published during pogroms in the 1918, 1919, during real upheavals. I wonder whether you have any thoughts what that moment and that work teaches you to think about the Zukunft, the future in after this war, which we hope will end soon.
In the first 2 weeks when this new wave of aggression started, as many of us know and are conscious, we have war since 2014. But since our army is working well, here in Kyiv, in Kharkiv, in other places, after these 8 years, we were not always feeling that it is going on. Of course, it is in the news, but we have peaceful life, full life in our cities owing to our army. And after February 24th, the first thing, you could not imagine it, then you could not speak, and returning to the works I showed you, this press, also I translated and into Ukrainian Der Tunkeler's bigger novel, which is revolutionary satire about 1919 pogroms, Bolshevik coming to Kyiv, changes of powers, him trying to escape Kyiv and how he does it. And still he's laughing, not crying, laughing. It's black humor, but it's laughter. What we can do try to do our works further. This is the most important, and I tell it to myself, it's not always easy. And you know what? There are a lot of current jokes, Ukrainian jokes, around this awful, tragic events going on now, but we should laugh on us, laugh on our enemies, laugh on the situation. On us also, we are self-critical, as Tunkiller was. He was, first of all, self-critical to himself and to Jewish politicians, you know. We have to be united. That's also very important. We have to try to hear each other. I don't know if I answered your question. I have plans to do more translations of Der Tunkeler and not only him. He has also small stories. One of them is Yiddishisten, a monologue von Kiewer Jud, a monologue of Kiev's Jew. And he tells the story how he was a normal Jew, like a Russian Empire Jew, speaking Russian. His kids are in Russian universities. It's pre-revolutionary or beginning of revolution. And then, wow, something happened. His Russian-speaking kids from Russian universities became Yiddishists, not only studying holy texts as Jewish wives in Yiddish. What's about it? It's for common people. It's for not enlightened people. Gathering small sorts of Yiddish ethnography, but also trying to do high poetry in Yiddish. That was 100 years ago, and that's always going on. Your self-identification, that's what's going on with many people now in Ukraine and all over the world. You ask yourself who you are, what should you be, and what will last, what will finish, what is the point of everything, you know?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I found really beautiful your connections and weaving your life experiences with these historical moments. There's a translator who is working on their Tunkeler here on the audience, and will certainly convey the email and contact with you. And Irina, do you want to read the message from Zhenya, who is at the audience? And
Nice. Well, nice to have you here, Zhenya. She writes, "Scheinem Dank, Tanya." And we also believe that there will be a renaissance of Kharkiv and the whole country after this war is finished. Thank you, Tetyana, again for being with us, for giving us this fantastic insight into Yiddish history of Ukraine, into Ukrainian history of Yiddish. We have, I think all of us here today have so many questions left, and we should definitely follow up on it, both on the history and on the current situation, and stay in touch on it. Yes. There is also a question about the archives of the Judaica department, but we had a conversation in the beginning with Tanya that she would rather not talk about it for safety reasons.
I'm amazed that Zhenya is with us. I have not advertised myself and didn't tell her that I would like to hear Zhenya singing, and there is one song which is not online, but I hope Zhenya will put it online. That is the song Holodno, but in Yiddish, Kalt iz mir. Zhenya knows what I mean. I hope she will publicize it and we can hear it as well.
So I think on this note, I want to thank, and there are all these notes of gratitude and appreciation from our attendees in the Q&A. So Tetyana, I'm really grateful for you sharing both your life and your work with us. I thought it was, beautiful, as I said, the weaving in of poetry and literature and the story to make it relevant and how it was made relevant for you over these years. And Irina, thank you for being such an amazing partner in this enterprise in these difficult times. And as I said before, the silver lining of this horrible situation is that we've been able to connect and discover wonderful scholars and wonderful new colleagues, new partners, and we hope to build on that in that future for the Zukunft that will be more connected and make you all so much more visible and part of our own lives as well. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Want to thank Irina and Tetyana again for sharing your work, and I hope we'll continue these conversations and these partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Magda.
Asheinem Dank.
Asheinem Dank.
Everyone, and when the war finishes, I hope to see everyone in Kyiv, in our library, and just around the world.
Yeah, we want to learn more about the Vernadsky Library, its history and its holdings and what it has to offer. So yes, we do want to hear more, and we hope to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Seid gesund.
Seid gesund.